Welcome everybody to this painting session of Legends of Kalidasia. I'm Jason, the creator of the tabletop miniatures game Legends of Kalidasia. And what we're going to be painting up tonight is this guy right here. This is an Oscoda Escort Carrier from the Kalidasia faction. And I'm going to be walking through tonight, painting up the armor panels here. I'll probably work on the bottom, just kind of figure out my color scheme. But let's get this whole process started. So like I mentioned, this is the Oscoda Escort Carrier for the Kalidasia. It's from my tabletop miniatures game Legends of Kalidasia, and you can purchase this miniature along with the other ships in the miniature line over at Kalidasia.com, and that link is down here in the corner logo. I always try to look there so I can get the whole backwards screen thing going on. So why don't we get started with the painting process? What I've got at this point here is I've actually the miniature assembled, and it's base coated in spray primer. I'm using the Army Painter Red Dragon, or Dragon Red color spray primer, and that's how I got the nice red base coat applied. However, this particular color of red is a little bit too bright. You can see here I've got an old, horrifically beaten up demo piece that I've used for a number of years that survived a near car crash, and for a lot of other reasons just got beaten up over the years. It's a little bit of a darker red, but that's alright. I can work on that to begin with. I'm actually going to start though on the bottom of the carrier, and the reason I'm going to be working on the bottom is, of course, these miniatures are kind of glued down to a little flight stand. So the bottom of the miniature is a great way to figure out what exactly your paint scheme is going to be. So you don't, if you screw something up, it's not as big a deal as if you were to screw something up on the top. And what I'm going to start with first is actually going to be the little crevices in between the armor panels, and also using a wash to not only fill those in, but to also darken down the overall armor panels themselves. So I'm going to start here with this guy. This is the Citadel brand Seraphim Sepia. It's one of a shade, which is what Games Workshop basically calls washes. Now, a wash, of course, is a very thin down type of paint that's designed to fill in the recesses of a miniature. And this helps bring out some of the detail, but also darkens things down. So I'm just going to run through here, and I'm going to try to fill in the little crevices in between the armor panels with this sepia wash. And if I hold this thing up, you can see how it's already starting to, the wash is starting to collect in between the armor panels, which is going to go ahead and give the illusion that there's a little bit of depth to those armor panels, because it's gonna, what's going to be is that there's the recesses between the armor panels are going to be dark, while the armor panels themselves are going to be a little bit lighter. And that's one of the coolest things about a wash. Now I'm using the wash right from the pot because it's already very thinned down. There isn't really any need to thin it down anymore. Oftentimes with normal paints you'll end up thinning them down with water a little bit, but with the Games Workshop brand of washes, or the shades as they call them, you really don't need to do that unless you're trying to reduce the effect of that particular color. Now in this case I'm not trying to do that because I really want to get a very dark, clear distinction, or very clear high contrast between the tops of the armor panels and these recesses here. As for the brush I'm using a very beat up zero size brush. You don't need anything too super detailed work with washes, just because by their very nature being so liquidy, they just kind of run all over the place anyway. I'll be using a smaller spotter brush later when it comes to painting the actual armor panels, but for now I'm just using a relatively large brush. Alright, well that's a pretty good start to the recesses between the armor panels. Hold that guy up there. You can see some really nice contrast between the armor panels. Alright, so let's just dry off the brush a little bit. And I'm going to keep this process going, but this time I'm going to make it even a little bit darker. I'm going to use some of the shade Nuln. My friend know how to pronounce that. I use the entire army of that. But the Nuln oil, and this is the normal one. There's a gloss version also that I'll use later, but this is the non-glossy version. And I'm just going to do a little bit of this. I'm actually going to water it down a little bit in my palette here. So I've actually got a wet palette going on over here. I'll explain about that in a minute. And I'm going to do the same thing, but this is just to give it a little bit more of a darker color in between some of the recesses. Whereas originally before I was working with some dark brown, now I'm just going to go ahead and darken it up just a little bit more. And of course, as I'm going through this process here, feel free to ask any questions about, not only what I'm doing here, but like I said, this is a tabletop miniatures game that I created and I've been running for the past 6 years. So feel free to ask any questions about the tabletop game industry itself. I'm more than willing to answer anything along those lines. And of course, thank you for joining tonight. Alright, so now we got a nice mixture between black and dark brown between most of the armor panels. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to want to move things along a little bit faster here. So I'm just going to actually... Ooh, boy, that really messes things up. Okay, don't do what I just did there. That was me experimenting a little bit, and I just ruined things. That's what you get for trying to go too fast. Alright, so I'm going back and repairing the damage I just did because I was getting a little too anxious, but that's alright. I can start painting it anyway because I'm actually going to be using some fairly watered down paint on the armor panels themselves. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes, and why don't I talk a little bit about what I'm using over here, this thing I referred to as a wet palette just a bit ago. So a wet palette is very simple. It's pretty much, in this case, I'm just using a bowl. It's actually from a TV dinner that, you're done with the food, just wash it out and use it. There's a small amount of water in the bottom here with a layer of wax paper over it. And all this really does is it helps keep the paint from drying out when it's on the palette. So it lets you use the paint a lot longer. Now, as a side effect, because of the fact that the paint is... obviously mixing with water, it's going to be a little bit thinner, which usually with most paints, especially say with like the Games Workshop paints, for example, you generally want to actually thin them down a little bit before you use them. It's just the nature of how that particular type of paint works. So let's jump in here and get to work on painting up the actual individual armor panels themselves. So I mentioned a moment ago, since I started this process with the dragon red primer, I mentioned it's a little bit too bright, so I want to darken it down a little bit. The color I'm going to start with is Evil Sun's Scarlet. Once again, this is a Citadel brand paint. Most of what I work with tends to be Citadel paint, just because they're convenient for me to get a hold of. But as you can see here, I've actually got another Army Painter bottle, and sometimes I even have some Reaper paints, because frankly I love these eyedropper bottles. Which would be nice if Games Workshop did that, but they don't. So anyway, this is Evil Sun Scarlet, and this is where you get to be very careful, because with the wash you kind of just do whatever you want with it. I'm going to take some of the paint, I'm going to put it down on my wet palette to thin out a little bit. And this is where I'm using my kind of beaten up, to be honest with you, a little beaten up spotter brush. I probably should get a new one, but it's what I've got for the time being. I'm just very carefully painting over the armor panels as best you can. It's going to be mixing a little bit with some of the wash you just applied. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's going to help darken things up again, which once again is one of the effects you want to go with. But just very carefully try not to get paint in the recesses. You can fix it later if you do, but it just kind of makes it a little bit nicer right now if that doesn't happen to you. Alright, let's go like that. A little bit more here. See, I don't know if you honestly even see in the webcam there's much of a difference. There is a little bit of a difference there. You can see it's a little bit reddish, a little bit more darker red per se, I guess would be a way to say it, or a little bit different shade of red. There's definitely going to be multiple layers to this, and because it's mixing with the wash, it's kind of creating a little bit of messiness. But that's all right. The plan with this particular miniature was actually to make it a little bit worn out and beaten up. Anyway. Let me see if I can clean some of this wash off the top of these things, because frankly it's not working too well. I'm probably getting a little anxious because I tend to do that. I can get a little jumpy with these things. So I'm cleaning off. What I'm doing first here is I'm going to clean off some of the wash. And then I'm going to go back and apply the Evil Sun Scarlet Red to them. So I'm just taking, this is the brush that I applied the wash with. And I'm just very carefully running over the armor panels with it. And then kind of soaking up the wash that's on them right now that didn't end up in the crevices. And that's going to let me paint on the Evil Sun Scarlet. Alright. Let's give this another shot here. Alright, taking the spotter brush with the Evil Sun Scarlet. We're being very careful. And it doesn't help, and because the fact that the paint is thinned down, that makes it a little bit harder also. But of course your goal here is just very carefully paint in these armor panels while trying not to get the paint in the crevices. So the reason I'm using thinned down paint is that if you want to get a relatively smooth look to your armor, the best way to do it is multiple layers of thin paint. When you start applying like a single layer of very thick paint, it tends to get caked on there and it can become relatively challenging to hide your brush strokes and things. So by using multiple thin layers of paint, that helps hide the brush strokes, and it makes it look, more like it's actual armor and not painted on like a miniature with painted armor. And what I tend to like to do is kind of focus on maybe a section of the miniature at a time. And once again, you're doing very carefully, trying not to get paint within the armor crevices, but let's face it, if you're not perfect, which of course I'm not, it's going to happen, and we're going to go back and fix that up later. But for right now, do your best to try and not do that. Okay, so I've kind of got the back half of this ship painted up a little bit of this more final red color, the Evil Sun Scarlet. So I'm going to go and paint another layer of that over top of it. This is where I was saying just a moment ago about how I kind of like to focus on one section at a time and just kind of keep going over those armor panels one pass, just maybe a few minutes after the other. To be honest with you, this is just kind of how I've always done it, and it worked out well for me for this type of ship. And if you can start to see your brush strokes, that means your paint's going on a little bit too thick. So it's probably a good idea to, in that case, just water down a little bit and keep going. In the end, I will probably go over each of the armor panels maybe 3 to 4 times. And that usually gives it the color I want the kind of consistency I want, as well as it. By that point, usually the brush strokes are pretty well hidden, and you get a more or less not perfect color, but depending on what you're going for, you probably don't want. Like, I mean, these are warships that have seen action and things, so they're not necessarily going to be perfect uniform color, which is good. It gives them a little bit more of what I feel anyway, a little bit more of a realistic look to them when they're not perfect uniform color. And that's obviously a result of going over it several times with a thin paint instead of one layer of a thicker paint. Plus the fact that I have the wash down initially for the crevices, the thin paint interacts with that wash and it gives it even a little bit more of a textured look, as if it's worn down a little bit, or things like that. Once again, I can see my brush strokes a little bit, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more water to my paint, mix it up a little bit better. Oops, and there we go. Got a little bit of paint in the armor crevices, but like I said, it's going to happen. And then just keep moving around the ship doing this. Then after a while, this back part here is going to dry, and I'm going to go back there and work on the next steps back there. But at the moment, let's jump over to this inside part. Now these little channels that run along the that divide the ship into several main sections, those are going to end up being silver, but I probably won't get to that today. I can see this little series being a multi-part, multi-step process. So once again, it's the same thing over and over again. These Kalidasia ships have lots of little armor panels to paint out. They're a little bit on the tedious side, to be honest with you, but it's a design I went with these particular miniatures. So I'm just taking Evil Sun Scarlet, thinning it down a little bit, both with the wet palette and just by adding water to it. And I go and paint each armor panel, and then I'll go back and paint it again a little bit later. And by a little bit later, I mean maybe a minute later. So I don't wait for the thin down paint to dry between these layers. It's just a way of getting not quite uniform color, a more of a realistic, cool looking, worn texture look than anything. Especially since the liquid paint, as I mentioned before, is interacting with the wash that I put down initially for the crevices. So anyway, I've kind of rambled on a bit enough about the process. I want to talk a little bit about the Kalidasia itself, because I'm actually going to make this ship be a member of one of the sub-factions. There's several sub-factions to the Kalidasia. It's actually one of the main characters of the race, Alana Kylan, talks about that very briefly in a story you can purchase over on the Kindle or Nook called The Heroes of Armageddon. It's actually book 3 in a series of 3 novellas about the Kalidasia Universe. But what I'm going to do is be painting this ship up as what's called an Arbiter of Justice. They are the most fanatical branch, well, arguably the most fanatical branch of the Kalidasia. They tend to be fairly militant, and a sizable portion of the Kalidasia's military basically is allegiance to the Arbiters of Justice. In particular, that name is not actually mentioned in the Exterion Fleet's expansion, which is the expansion that introduces the Kalidasia in the game Legends of Kalidasia. It showed up in the end of the Baron Sekar campaign. So for a couple of years, I think the Baron Sekar campaign lasted a while. It might have been almost 2 years. It took me a while to get all the events scheduled. But I run campaign events at local conventions, and based on the results of those, they affect the storyline of the Kalidasia Universe. So at the end of the Baron Sekar campaign, the Arbiters of Justice learn something a very big, important piece of information that you can go and read about over on Kalidasia.com. Look under the events page, and you can find the Baron Sekar campaign. That's actually pretty important to the upcoming storyline of the Kalidasia Universe. But anyway, so the Arbiters of Justice, like I mentioned, are one of the baby sub-factions, per se. Not really baby faction, one of the sub-factions of the Kolidasia Guard military. And what makes that, why that's important, is they have a little bit of a different color scheme here. This one I keep showing off here, it's all beaten up. This bluish here is actually not paint, that's the, that is the original 3D print. Yeah, that's the inside of the 3D print, because it got really beaten. There's pieces broken off of it for one reason or another. Paint's chipped off. So that's actually a 3D print color. The normal mainline Kolidasia Guard is this kind of reddish color with the silver in the middle. The Arbiters of Justice keep that same reddish color, and this red silver color, but what they have is along the right side of the hull, which would be the starboard side, which since I've got the ship upside down, it'd be the left side over here. They've got several goldish white stripes, and those are squadron markings. So I'm going to get to those later. Probably, I don't know if I get those in this video or not, but those are kind of what identifies the ship as a member of the Arbiters of Justice. Let me just continue going around the armor here a little bit. And then I'll go back and start working on some more details on the back here. Because it looks like the back, I'm kind of tilting my head to the light. I can see these back armor panels. There's a little bit of wet spots on them. Not much though, so they'll probably be dry pretty quickly. But I'm just continuing the same process I've been doing up to this point, where I just kind of focus on part of the ship and I apply several layers of thinned down red paint. Like I said, in this case it's Evil Sun Scarlet from the Citadel paint line. That's the Games Workshop's paint line. And I just kind of go around in the section in a pattern to put probably 3 layers of paint down, and that gives it a uniform, like I said, a uniform-ish color. It gives it how do I want to describe this? It hides the paintbrushes, but it gives it not a perfect uniform color. It does make it look like there's some texture to the armor panel, which is probably what you would expect to see in the case of a warship that's been around for a while in space and possibly served in combat. I actually haven't wrote a lot of the history of the Kolidasia Guard prior to them encountering the Urgul Empire. The Urgul Empire being the main faction in the Kalidasia Universe. The Kolidasia Guard are actually not from the area space around where the main Kalidasia storyline takes place. They're pretty much essentially what happens is there's an expedition fleet of theirs runs into an Urgul fleet. Well, the Kolidasia Guard is basically on archaeological expedition. They're out trying to figure out. There's scientific research going on to see if their ancient historical books are actually accurate. They're kind of going from planet to planet, trying to figure out where these various locations may be, if they did exist. And they find certain interesting things. And if you do purchase a copy or purchase the box set, you can find they do make an interesting discovery about their historical text. That's kind of going to probably play in later on in the Kalidasia storyline. There's lots of things getting set up early on here that, frankly, I probably won't have payoffs for years to come. But okay. So I've pretty much been around the entire warship here, applying this very thin layer of Evil Sun Scarlet to each armor panel several times. And I'm going to let them dry, and I'm going to start working back where I initially started here, back in the corner. Now, unfortunately, something happened, and I didn't get a lot of wash in between the armor panels to give that illusion of depth. So I want to fix. I'm actually not going to fix that first. I'm going to go back and fix that in a bit, because you notice the rest of the ship has a lot of wash in between the armor panels. For some reason, something happened back here where that didn't get there. So let me actually fix that later. Instead, what I want to do is I'm going to add just some dry brushing to these panels to kind of bring out the edges a little bit. So once again, I'm taking Evil Sunz Scarlet from the Citadel paint line. That's Games Workshop's line of miniature paints. I'm going to put down some more of that here in my wet palette. And I'm going to mix that with a little bit of, let's see, what white do I have here? I have Skull White, which I think is from a generation ago from the Citadel paint line, but it doesn't really matter. Any white color will work pretty good. We're just trying to get a little bit of edge highlighting to the armor panels by making it a little bit brighter red color. You can see here, there's normal Evil Sunz Scarlet. It's probably difficult to see on the webcam, but there's a little bit of a pinkish color right next to it. So it's about just getting a little bit brighter color. And then I'm going to bring out my dry brush, which is actually the big brush I've been using for the wash is also my dry brush. Now, dry brushing is a technique where you take the paint on your brush on something like a paper towel here. You wipe most of it off because you want a very small amount of paint, and it's about very lightly going over your surface and transferring that very small amount of lightly colored paint or dark colored paint, whatever it may be, onto some of the raised edges. And it's definitely a very subtle effect. So in that case, I think I wiped a little bit too much of the paint off. But all I'm trying to do is, with each of the armor panels, on one of the sides, I'm dry brushing a little bit to make that side just a tiny bit lighter than the other side. And this is going to give a very slight color gradient across each of the armor panels. I'm pretty confident you can't see it on the webcam because, you know, it's not a great webcam. They're not known for their awesome colors. But just trust me, there's a little tiny bit of a color gradient there. And if you were to see it in person, you would see a little bit of a color gradient. And let's see here. What else is dry? It's dry up there. Most of this is dry except for this little splotch right here. It's not dry for some reason. So let me just fix that. I'm cheating a little bit to move things along faster. So once again, I am applying some of the dry brushing to just half of each of the armor panels. And that's just to get, once again, that slight color gradient to go from a little bit brighter to a little bit darker. Now it's important to know, which side of the armor panel you're applying the particular shade, or the particular highlight to, because you want to apply it to the same side of all the armor panels. Because one thing you're trying to accomplish here is the illusion of that there's light reflecting off the ship. And if light is hitting the ship at an angle, this one side of the armor panel is going to be a little bit brighter than the other side. Not by a lot, just a tiny bit. We're going to make that probably even a little bit more distinct here in a minute, but let me just finish with some more dry brushing of this area. And then we'll do the process with the rest of the ship a little bit later. I might just do that part off camera, to be honest with you. But anyway, okay. So we got a small gradient going across each of the armor panels. And I'm going to now, let's make that even a little bit more visible. A little bit more white down in the Evil Sunz Scarlet. Let's see if we can see that color transition. Whoops. Yep, you can see there's definitely a much brighter pink color there. And same thing. Same side. Oh, that's a little too much. A little too aggressive on that pink color there. It's very easy to do that. Very, very easy to apply too much paint. I think I might have did a little bit there, but there's still, you kind of see there's a little bit of a transition going there. Probably just a tiny bit too much paint there I just applied, but we can fix that later. So anyway, as I'm doing this process, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Kalidasia storyline. So where we are at this point in the Kalidasia Universe storyline, we're 6 months into the Surukari's invasion of the Ergul Empire. So the main storyline of the Legends of Kalidasia story is that the Surukari, who's an insect-like alien race, I don't have any of their ships sitting around here, they're all over there on my table. They're invading the Ergul Empire, and the Kalidasia are kind of part of the sideshow right now. Now, what we do know is that the Surukari and the Kalidasia don't like each other. They apparently supposedly fought a war a long time ago alongside one of the other alien races in the storyline called the Krylin. But that's going to come in more later. So as the Surukari are kind of ripping apart a corner of the Ergul Empire, the Kalidasia, who happen just by pure chance, literally just pure chance, are in the same area. They're going to start moving into what was the Ergul Empire and kind of exploring what's going on, learn more about the strength of the Surukari, why they're doing what they're doing, and try to figure out what exactly is going on. Because frankly, at this point, no one really knows what's going on. No one knows why the Surukari attacked the Ergul Empire. The Ergul don't even know. The Ergul didn't even really know who the Surukari was prior to them invading. Historical records say the Ergul Empire probably encountered the Surukari a long time ago, about 500 years or so before the storyline begins, but bureaucracy set in, and they really never paid a whole lot of attention to that particular encounter. Maybe they should have. But alas, that's history, and there's nothing they could do about it now. And you can start to see this whole process of the Kalidasia moving into Ergul territory, once again with that story is talking about the heroes of Armageddon. Because actually the planet that are referred to as Armageddon by the Kalidasia is an Ergul planet called Silex 4. It's one of the first planets to be hit by the Surukari, and it's also where you introduce the main characters, the main storyline character, Abby Cyan, she is one of the main Ergul characters in the storyline. Alright. So what I want to do now I've got a little bit of a pinkish shade on each of the sides of the armor panel, I want to actually make sure I get a little bit more of a red color back in there. So we're going back to the original Evil Sunz Scarlet, and I'm going to dry brush the opposite direction. Just to kind of counteract things a little bit, and then I'm going to dirty things up. I've done some really cool effects with this non oil shade, or however it's pronounced. Let me actually get some actual Evil Sunz Scarlet back on my wet palette over here. Just to kind of push back some of the pink. Where if you overdid the pink a little bit, just kind of do the same process in reverse here. And that will kind of push it back and restore some of that red color. We're still giving you a little bit of a tint, per se, to the armor panels. So we've got a little fun story here where the Kalidasia warships get their names. So the ones that we know of so far, like I mentioned, this is the Oscoda. We have the Dryden, we have the Argyle, and then there's also the fighter, which is the Larkin. Also in Heroes of Armageddon, you're introduced to the Mackinac class of dropships. And though I haven't formally announced them yet, I'm thinking for some of the battle cruisers going to be the Ionia class, as well as there's a possibility of a Pontiac class. I'm not sure yet about that last one. I'm still deciding. But for those who don't know what those names all have, how they're all related, is they're all names of locations in Michigan. Most of them being cities. Obviously, Mackinac is in the northern city. Iona is a county in western Michigan. Dryden is kind of. Let's see if I'm in. If you. Oh, I'm gonna bring my. It's funny. Let's see. Turn the work camera off. Work camera off. Here we go. Is that the right shape? I don't know. I'm not sure how you look at the screen. I could just be backwards. But so Dryden somewhere around up here, and then Oscoda. That is a tiny little town up in northern Michigan. It was a place. I chose it in particular. Oh, there's also the Tawas class. That's also up in northern Michigan, northern lower Michigan by Oscoda. And that's actually a neat little place that my family would often go to when I was younger as a child, as a vacation stop. There isn't much there, to be honest with you. There really isn't a lot in that city, but it was just a neat little town. It's got a neat little beach there. No, the state park's in state park's in Harrisville. Oh, there's a state park in Harrisville and a state park in Tawas. Though the reason why it get named after a carrier class is there used to be an Air Force base in Oscoda, Michigan. I believe it's now been taken over by a private company, and they do whatever they do. I want to say they do airplane repair up there. I had a friend who used to work up, I believe, in that airfield. But that's the random little story of where the Kalidasia Warships get their name. You're going to start seeing, because the Aragul and Surikari ships didn't really have names from the beginning for whatever reason. They're just called a frigate, destroyer, battlecruiser. But if you start seeing on the website, I'm starting to give them various names. Like of course, the Hammerhead is the Aragul frigate prime, the Tiger Shark. The Mackerel is the Aragul anti-fighter frigate. We'll talk about that a bit more in a little bit here. I'm pulling out now. What order do I want to do this in? I'm actually, before I get a different order. I gotta get some more of the Skull White going with the Evil Sun Scarlet, and using the brush, I got two spotter brushes here, don't I? They're both in terrible shape. I need to buy new spotter brushes. Using the spotter brushes, I'm gonna highlight the edges of the armor panel that I dry brushed pink. Let's get a little bit more. Okay, we can work with what's in my wet palette already. But I'm rambling some more, but why not ramble about the Kalidasia Universe for anyone who does end up watching this thing? I was talking about the Aragul ships, why they're named the way they're named. So like I mentioned, there's the Aragul Hammerhead, the Tiger Shark, and the Mackerel. Those are all shark species. You have, for the destroyer, there's now the Pale Fox is the main one. You have the main Wolf, which is the Seeking Missile Destroyer, and then you've got the Lynx, which is the battle cruiser, and then there's the Orca, which is the battleship class that is showing up from time to time in some of the main events, like say the Battle for Verlanda. Now, anyway, very carefully here, I tell part of a story, then I do some painting. Tell part of a story, do some painting. I really need to get a little bit more thicker paint going. That's a little too thin there. So, what those all have in common is those are all apex predators. Maybe not necessarily apex predators, but they're all kind of really cool predators. So the Aragul warships are all going to be named after predators, which means they're going to have to do a little bit of name changing, because of course there's the Saber. The Saber being the little, what is it? I guess what do I call them? Light warship is the name they're currently referred to. They're going to actually eventually have their name changed to corvettes. But, light warships. Now, of course, the Saber is a weapon, not a animal. So what I think I'm going to end up doing with those guys is Saber, it's going to be renamed to, they're going to be named after falcons and eagles and birds of prey. Because there's going to be several other variations in that class. In fact, if you have Kalidasia Fleet Commander, you should take a close look at the Tiger Shark token. That's all I'm going to say. If you don't have Kalidasia Fleet Commander, it's an awesome game, you should buy a copy. I may be biased, I created it. A Kalidasia Fleet Commander, if you watch the intro video there, which if you're on YouTube, I'll probably take that out, is the game of Planetary Siege in the Kalidasia Universe. It's whereas Legends of Kalidasia Squadron Scale, Kalidasia Fleet Commander kind of takes it up another notch. And right now I'm just highlighting the edges of the armor that I dry brushed with the pink. And this is just giving it a little bit more look like the light is reflecting off of it. And you can kind of see that in the webcam there. It's a nice change of pace. You can see if I tilt it, there's really bright lines there. That's the pink that I'm painting on right now. So all the bright lines, oh dear, I just screwed that up. The joys of getting to see Jason paint his miniatures for production purposes. You see all the wonderful screw-ups I make. That's probably half the fun of the show, right? This is just me just talking. That's the whole point of the show, is me just talking as I paint. So you can see these bright lines here. That is my studio light off the side over here, reflecting off the pink that I just painted on those lines. That's why you can't see it quite as much in the front of the ship, but in the back, because I haven't painted the front armor panels just quite yet. Okay. Do I want to apply... let's try and see how this looks. I'm going to take some pure white and just very carefully go over parts of those lines again where, you know, the idea is where there's really a lot of light reflecting off of it. And it's actually ended up being just slightly tinted red, so it's a very light pink. Let me see if you can see it down there. And just like what, oh boy. The problem with the wet palette is that it just mixed with some of the shade from earlier and just kind of messed things up. So let me put some more white down there that hopefully won't get messed up by moving my palette around. That's one of the things about using a wet palette. You can't really pick it up to show what I'm painting, because then the paint runs around, mixes, and kind of screws things up. So as much as a wet palette is really useful for painting, it's probably not the best for demonstrating painting videos like this. And just very, very carefully. Tiny amounts of white. You still want it to mostly be pink. This is a very tricky effect to pull off, and frankly I'm not particularly great at it. But it's the bottom of the ship, so this is where you can experiment with exactly how you want your paint scheme to look. And if it looks awful, don't do it in the top. It's kind of a nice little bonus about that, isn't it? Alright, just a few more armor panels over here. And then I am going to start working on giving them a little bit of a shade to them. I'd love to show you the picture of the Surikari Delphinus I painted up, but actually my friend has that at the moment. He was running some demos of space combat games at a local convention this weekend, and he needed some miniatures, so he borrowed all my awesome looking brand new professionally, well, not professionally painted, I'm not a professional painter, but he borrowed my the brand new Draco Delphinus and Mackerel and Hammerhead, as I'm sitting here thinking what those were called, and I just told you all about them 2 minutes ago. Thunk. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to create a little bit of an effect that there's a little bit of a dirtiness going on the opposite sides of the armor panels. So one of the sides of the armor panels, of course, has those bright white, pink, and white stripes to it to give the illusion of the lights reflecting off it. The other side, I want them to make them a little bit dirty and crummy. This is a very easy thing to screw up. I pulled it off on the Delphinus, and it looked absolutely awesome. Can I actually import something while I'm streaming? I'm gonna try and not break my stream right now. I don't know what will happen. Let's find out. Where are my... I'm trying to see here. Legends of Kalidasia. Nope, that's not it. The Legends of Kalidasia folder actually doesn't contain the game Legends of Kalidasia. It's a strange thing I've set on my computer. Okay, products. Here's the figure line. Actually, it might be in the website directory. I honestly have terrible layout of my Legends of Kalidasia directory on my computer. It's kind of because I just did everything a little bit at a time every now and then, and I don't really have a whole lot of cohesiveness to it. It's on a list of things to improve. Let's see, intercept. There's my Delphinus. I can show you that picture. Oh, wait, cancel. Yes. Let's just drag it in the middle here and make it bigger. You probably can't even see the effect that I'm talking about. There's a little bit of it right here. Unfortunately, you can't see my mouse. You don't know exactly what I'm talking about. But in the main hull part forward of the side of the armor facing the camera there, so you'll find the main gun, and it's the armor panel to the left side of the screen and down. So it's like the front armor panel, the main back body section there. There's a little bit of shading that goes on all those armor panels near the bottom. You can't really see much of it. You see a little bit of a little too much spot right there, but that's the effect that I'm going to be trying to go for here. So it's very easy to screw up, but if you get it right, it looks freaking cool. And this is where I'm pulling out the known oil gloss. Looks like I said, my friend actually has that particular army for, well, what was Warhammer Fantasy. Okay, so I'm taking some of this known oil wash, and I'm really thinning it down, because this is very easy to screw up. Like, I keep saying that because it is. And very carefully, on the opposite sides of the armor panel, I'm just applying some of it. And the one thing that's nice about these shades, because that's actually what Games Workshop calls their wash as shades, is that you can apply a little bit or you can apply a lot. It's fairly easy to control just how much you apply. It's a lot easier to add more than to take away, because the only way to take away, you kind of have to spread it around a little bit, which you may not want to do. So it's a lot, like I said, it's a lot easier to add more. But it creates a very cool contrast from one side of the armor panel to the next. And it also does give the ship a little bit of a dirty look to it, as if it's seen action. If it's an older warship, it's not nice and fancily painted, right? And the one thing nice about using the gloss type for this, because I use the normal one in between some of the armor panels, the gloss is shiny, so it still retains a little bit of that metallic look, like it's just dirty metal. So if I didn't apply too much there, it'll end up looking pretty cool. And it does take a little bit for the shade to dry, so if you do think you put a little too much on there, what you can do is just wipe off your brush on a paper towel and go over the area once again with your brush, and that'll pick up some of the shade. Alright. It's time to go back in and fix up the recesses in between the armor panels that I screwed up earlier. I'm not entirely sure how I did that, but I did. Probably when I tried to use what did I do? What did I screw up earlier? Oh, when I tried to use the paper towel to soak up the excess shade, that was an oops. So, time to go in there and fix up some of that a little bit. Do I want to get a little bit crazy and experiment? Yes. Yes, I do. It's always fun to try to do with miniatures. Like I said, it's the bottom of the warship. If I screw up the paint scheme a little bit, who cares, right? Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some of the Sepia wash, Seraphim Sepia, yes, Sepia. I should know how to pronounce that. That's a video color, so Sepia. Yeah, that's really kind of embarrassing. I don't know how to pronounce that. I am going to wash the armor panels with a very light amount of this. It tends to work pretty well with red. It's going to darken up a little bit, which once again was my original idea. It's going to make it look a little bit dirtier, which is not a bad thing if you're looking for a little bit older style looking warship. Which you might be able to make the argument that the Arbiters of Justice, as I talked about earlier being one of the sub-factions, they're not necessarily the most well-liked because of the fact they are so fanatical that they may not have the newest shiny gear like, say, the mainline Kalidasia Guard would. So these guys may actually kind of be snubbed a little bit by the government for being so fanatical by having a little bit older ships. Now also what this tends to do is it tones down some of the highlights a little bit. And it can give a little bit of a spotted pattern. Spotted, kind of ugly. It can get a little bit messy if you put it on too strong. Since I found out that I can show you guys pictures while I'm streaming, let me bring up my hammerhead. This is the official hammerhead miniature that I painted up when I released the new hammerhead miniature early in the year. You'll see what I mean when you apply too much of the Tiger Shark Beta. What does Tiger Shark Beta mean? I don't know what Tiger Shark Beta means. Where is that? You'll see what I mean though by too much wash, because you, especially on miniature, when you try to take photos of them, too much of a wash will give it a very uneven, splashy pattern. If that makes any sense. Let me see if I think it's in here. Here we are. This'll work. Okay. So let me drag this guy over, and you can see this is definitely too much wash. You can see it's very it's like a splashy thing I'm talking about. Look at the top of the Javelin missile launcher here. There's a whole dark spot right there, very clear differentiation. The other part of the top, same other missile launcher. You've got this weird brown spot running down the middle. I forget you can't see my mouse cursor, but you can figure out what I'm talking about. Look at the far away Javelin missile launcher. That is what happens when you go too overboard in the wash. You get such strong changes that it doesn't look very good. I mean, maybe that's what you're trying to go for, but that's not what I'm trying to go for right now with the Oscoda. So that's why I'm being very careful, watering down the shade to give just the smallest of changes. I don't want them to be super noticeable. I just want to look like the ship is kind of a little bit worn down. I love how I went from painting like a nice, pretty, nice new warship to deciding, hey, let's make this warship kind of run down as like a very old version of the Oscoda over the course of an hour and a half. And see, that's what happens when you kind of start experimenting with paint schemes. You can just kind of start playing with how you want the paint scheme to go, and in the process, you're kind of creating the story around your particular fleet. Because just like with a lot of other miniature games with Legends of Kalidasia, I encourage you to kind of create your own little squadron. You know, who are your sub factions? What do they fight for? Who are they? You know, they a part of? This is the Arbiters of Justice. The Iragul, are you mainline? Are you part of the Kylon family? The Kylon family has been mentioned a few times. Once again, in Heroes of Armageddon. In fact, if you actually enjoy the Legends of Kalidasia storyline and haven't read the series, this Battle for Silex, you really should. It's not terribly long. I think they're combined. You're looking at 200 pages-ish, maybe a little bit less than 150 pages. And it's a neat little story to give you some information on the background of the politics of the Iragul Empire, the relationship between the Krylon and the Iragul, Krylon and the Kalidasia Guard, as well as introducing several main characters, in particular Abby Cyan and Alana Highland are going to be two of the main characters. If you actually read Heroes of Armageddon, there's a little quote in the beginning by Abby Cyan that kind of gives a clue about her eventual future. Alright, so anyway, I went from having a nice new warship to something kind of run down a little bit, and that's the effect I went with the shade in the back. I kind of darkened things up a little bit, and I made them a little bit muckier. But finally, I want to fix up the between the little, the armor panels, make that a little bit more distinct, and correct my mistake from earlier. Once again, I'm going to go back to the known oil. I forget how that's pronounced. It's a 4-letter word, not the gloss one, just the normal one. And I'm going to use a spotter brush and very carefully just go in between the armor panels. This is once again restoring kind of what I did early on, trying to get the shade to collect in between the armor panels and give a nice high contrast look between the various panels. Trying not to get the shade on the actual armor panels themselves. If you do, you can just very carefully take corner of a paper towel like that and fix it, but it will take off some of the shade of the brown of the sepia that we just applied a little bit ago. You can see it's just very careful with the spotter brush. The spotter brush is actually a specific size, and you can find them at pretty much any place that sells artistic brushes. So your major big box stores will sell them, as well as any local art stores will be able to sell them, and it's a size. So you could ask for spotter brush, and people will know what you're talking about. You probably can't see the tiny little text on there, but right there it says spotter. Trust me on that. Most brush sizes are numbers, that's just what they are. I really have no idea why they're done that way. Probably because it makes sense being numbers. Except this one is a spotter brush. But then you have like fan brushes and things too. But anyway, okay. So that gives a little bit more of the contrast between the armor panels. And that was an incredibly long, what was that? What am I at here? About probably an hour and 10 minutes of me talking about how I paint up some of the Kalidasia ships to make them look like they're old and crummy. But hey, that is what I was going to do tonight, so why not? So once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Kalidasia Universe. Wow, my light is really harsh. Oh boy, I don't take myself too seriously when I do these things. I basically hide in my apartment behind me with my newly purchased fancy photo screen stand thing. Yeah, about a really nice backdrop stand. And that's actually the wrinkled, horrible backdrop that we used years ago in the tabletop battlefield. I probably should iron out to make it look halfway decent, but I haven't done that yet because it's been folded away for a year. Actually, it's been sitting on my floor since we did actually film our Christmas episode of the tabletop battlefield a few weeks ago. And it's been crumpled under my dinner table over there. So anyway, that's good enough for now. It's just I was just kind of tossing out some experimental things you can play with to get different looks for armor panels for the Kalidasia, or really any kind of warship or tank or whatever you want to apply these to. Of course, I do want you to purchase the Kalidasia miniatures because, hey, I sell them. I may be a little biased, right? But, whatever works, of course. So thank you for watching. If you want to have any questions about the Kalidasia Universe or want to learn more about the story, you can head over to the game's website at kalidasia.com. And with that, have a good night, and I will jump on sometime again in the future. I don't really have a schedule for doing these painting tutorials just quite yet, but I will definitely jump back on later on to continue on with the Oscoda Carrier do some of the silver interiors here. Of course, we got the engines, we got the escape ports, and then there's all these little flat guns that run along the top and bottom of this thing. Did I say escape ports? I meant there's a carrier, so you have launch bays. And the Kalidasia Guard are the one race that's described as having some sort of energy barrier between space and atmosphere. Most of the other ones don't have that. But the Kalidasia Guard are actually described in Heroes of Armageddon. Plug, buy the book, it's 99 cents. But you gotta buy the first two first, right? So you end up buying here Silex Road, and then Secrets of Silex, and then you get to Heroes of Armageddon. Because if you dive into Heroes of Armageddon, you won't figure out exactly what's going on. You might be able to. You wouldn't know why they're stranded on the planet, I guess. But anyway, you figure that stuff out in the first two entries in the series. But I'm rambling again, because I do that a lot. But I will certainly jump on and paint some more of the Oscoda Carrier, as well as talk about the Kalidasia Universe and all that fun stuff again sometime in the future. The best way to do it is probably follow, I guess you could follow me on Twitter. It's my personal Twitter account. It's not a Legends of Kalidasia one, so just be advised, TT_Battlefield, that it's not a formal representation of my company. It's me talking, and you have no idea what I could possibly say. But that's where I do post these things. I should probably set up a Legends of Kalidasia Twitter account and Instagram account and Pinterest, maybe, I don't know. I don't really know. I'm just trying to figure this stuff out as I go. So with that, I'm going to stop rambling for once tonight. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.